As I mentioned earlier, before Solomon shared his words of Torah, he spoke about this week's Parashat Metsora. But today is also Shabbat haGadol. It is the Shabbat right before Passover, and there's a tradition today to study about Pesach and to look at the words of the Haggadah. So I thought we would do that, and it's going to be a little less formal, our sermon this morning. So I invite anybody that would like to participate a bit in the first part and share some thoughts as we look at a few verses in our Torah that are from that later come up in the Haggadah, to please join me. So if you're interested, you can open your Chumash on page 1028 in the book of Devarim, verse 20. You'll see a verse. On page 1028, the book of Devarim, chapter 6, verse 20. So as you look at this, the question is, does anything look familiar to you? Ma ha'edot v'hahukim v'hamishpatim asher tziva Adonai Eloheinu etchem.
The wicked son.
Oh, the wicked son. Interesting. The wicked son. Anyone have a counter answer? So it's close, because it is, we're talking to you, what are these laws, decrees, and rules, and all of that our Lord God commanded you? So it's an interesting thing. There's a lot written about this, actually, Doug, the similarity in that part of the answer, but it's actually the Hacham. This is the wise son. And the answer given to the wise son comes from the Mishnah, actually, not the Torah, but the answer is a quote from the Mishnah, which talks about, you teach them all about the decrees, the laws, and the rules. You teach them the rules of Pesach, and it focuses on the law of the Afikomen. But if you turn now to the book of Shemot, page 393, chapter 13, verse 14, you're going to see another piece of the Haggadah there. Page 393, chapter 13, verse 14 of Shemot. Promise our choose your own adventure through the Torah is only because one more source after this, so you're almost there. Does that look familiar to anybody? Chapter 13, verse 14 on page 393. V'marta elav, mazot, right? What is this? V'marta elav, bechozet yad, hotzianu Adonai mimitzrayim mibeit avadim. What is this? And you say to them, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Which son is this? The Tom, the simple son. So we have two more sons left. And I want you to turn now, it's actually just the page before 392, chapter 13, verse 8. On page 392. And I want us to figure out what this one is. You shall explain to your son that on that day, Bavor asa Adonai li b'tzeiti mimitzrayim. It's because of what God did for me when I went free from Egypt. Which son is that? Not the Chazan. People up there. Sorry? The one who doesn't know how to ask the question. Great. Anyone have any other answers? The Rasha, someone says. I didn't hear who. I heard it came from this way. Barbara, excellent. The Rasha. What do we think? Raise your hand if you think that that's the Sheino Yodea Lishol, the son that doesn't know how to ask. Raise your hand if you think it's the Rasha. Raise your hand if you're sleeping and not answering. There we go. It was about split, I'd say 50-50 between the 15% of the people that participated, between the Rasha and the wicked son and the son that doesn't know how to ask. And the answer is actually that it's both. I don't know if you noticed that. Have you ever noticed that both of them get the same answer? The wicked son asks a different question. What is this worship to you? Which comes from another section of the book of Shemot, chapter 6, but we're not going to look there today. But the answer given to both the wicked son and the son that doesn't know how to ask come from this verse. You should tell your child on that day, it's because of this the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt. Now the haGadol adds to that Torah quote a little bit different, right? For the wicked son, you blunt their teeth. You add at the end, for me and not for him. That wicked son would not have been saved. But the answer itself, because of what God did for me when I left Egypt, is the same. So my question then is, why? Why do these two very different, or at least seemingly very different children, the one who doesn't even know how to ask, it seems even more simple than the simple son, and the wicked son, the one that we're told is as educated as the Chacham, but uses their powers for bad instead of for good. Why do they get the same answer? It's an interesting question, I think. I mean, I asked it. But I'm going to come back to it in a moment. I want us to hold on to that. There's a broader meta lesson, I think, about the four sons, which today in the modern world of education and pedagogy, it's, the hip term people use, right? Differentiated education or individualized education. There's this recognition today in the educational field, the profession, in our schools, that people learn differently. Different people need to be taught in different ways. Some people are visual learners, some people are auditory, some people are kinesthetic and need hands-on. Right? Truth's probably all like a blend of the different approaches. In the Haggadah, the rabbis, more than 2 millennia ago, knew this. They knew that people learn differently. And our tradition has always told us to meet each and every Jew where they are in their education, in their process. But there's one area of Jewish education that continues to trouble me. And if anyone's been following the news out of Israel in the past 2 weeks, it's been troubling me more and more and more. There seems to be a disconnect, a failure in the diaspora Jewish world in teaching the next generation to love and to value Israel. And in different communities, in different places, that level of disconnect and the level of failure, right, is in different degrees. Canada actually has an incredibly strong relationship amongst Canadian Jewry with Israel and a very close connection. And yet, as you look at the data from younger and younger Jews, each successive generation, their affiliation, their affinity with Israel, their sense of connection, their Zionist identity becomes more and more diluted, more and more corrupted by things they hear and see. So one of the things I've often spoke about is the need to really give a more nuanced education to people, to prepare our young adults for when they go off to university and they experience anti-Zionism, when they hear things from their professors, their classmates, when they see it in the news, to be able to really confront it. Because I know from my own Jewish experience, which so many have that have strong Jewish backgrounds of synagogue, of camp, of youth group, some even with day school, that learn lots about Israel for 18 years of their life, and they get to university, and it's the first time they hear someone say something really awful about Israel. And as they investigate and hear more, they learn sometimes that there might be the tiniest bit of truth of some things. Israel is not perfect. But it calls into question everything they've been taught their whole life. Slogans and talking points aren't enough to prepare them to face that. And so many fall into the trap of questioning everything they were taught about Israel and going far in the other direction. So for the Chacham, we need a nuanced conversation with our next generation, with younger Jews as they grow up. But how do we address the other two? So I want to skip the Rasha at first, the wicked son, the one who actively calls for an end of the Jewish state, the one who really is an anti-Zionist. I want to take a look really quickly at the Tam, the simple son. Somebody who doesn't know anything yet, or knows very little, just the basics. The 1 in 5 Canadian Jews, 1 in 5, who don't have a strong opinion about Israel. They don't feel a big connection or attachment at all. They have to be taught about the rich history. They have to be taught about how those who founded overcame adversity at every turn, and each generation subsequently has faced and overcome adversity. How despite its small size, Israel is a world leader in contributing to advancements in science and in medicine, technology, agriculture, and more. They need to see how Israel is on the ground offering aid to victims of natural disasters around the world. How Israeli hospitals treat those who need it, regardless of their race, their religion, their nationality. How Israel is the only country in its neighborhood where one's sexual orientation and gender identity don't put you at risk of violence or death. They need to see Israel and learn all about what it is and what it means. The simple son. But then we still have the Rasha and the one who doesn't know how to ask. The one that doesn't even know the question. And we're told they get the same answer. And to this, the answer, I think, is the face and names, the stories of the victims. What do we teach the one who doesn't know how to ask? We share with them the story. You shall tell them, right? The verb is specifically the same verb that comes from the word haGadol. V'higidata. You shall tell them. They have to learn the story. So many of you know that on Thursday night there was a terrorist attack in Israel. A gunman walked into a bar on Dizengoff Street and opened fire. More than a dozen people were injured. 2 died that night and another passed away on Friday. Barak Lofen, who passed away Friday, succumbing to his wounds, was a father of 3. He was a 2-time Olympian, and he represented Israel in both Beijing and in London. And he has 3 children who are now fatherless. The 2 other victims of Thursday's attack, Eitam and Tomer, were both students at Tel Aviv University. They had been friends since they were kids, since childhood, and they went out on Thursday night to have a beer. Eitam just got engaged last month. His fiancée will now stand with him at the cemetery to say goodbye, rather than under a chuppah to build a home together. We need to know these stories because they need to be taught. There were 14 victims of Palestinian terrorist attacks in just the last 2 weeks. And that's not to mention those who were injured as well, or those who are afraid now to simply go out to a bar to have a drink with a friend. And it's those stories that get lost in the news. They get lost in the lies and the distortions of publications. For example, one international publication had a headline this week which read, "Israeli forces shoot dead Palestinian after Tel Aviv bar attack." Another had it as, "Israel forces kill Palestinian after Tel Aviv shooting leaves 2 dead." The first 4 words, as many people scroll through Facebook and other posts when they see this, are, "Israeli forces kill Palestinian." That's the emphasis of the title as opposed to the victims of the attack. Choosing to identify the attacker by their nationality alone as Palestinian rather than as a terrorist or the gunman. It's similar with those posts that I saw on Facebook and Twitter, posts from rabbis and Jewish organizations that champion the cause of justice for Palestinians. It's an important cause, a cause I care about too. But a few words and prayers for peace or thoughts for the victims ring hollow compared to the impassioned rhetoric these same rabbis and Jewish organizations condemn Israel on a regular basis. These are the Rasha, those who regularly distort the facts, who tell deliberately one side of the story to make Israel the enemy. who actively contribute to the destruction of the Jewish homeland. Those are the Rasha. But they get the same answer as the ones who don't know how to ask. The ones who don't even know the story. The ones who, if they hear the other version, and we don't speak up each and every time it's out there, we don't share the stories of the Israelis, of the Jews who are part of this conflict and struggle, we lose them to the other side. And that is actually the answer that Rabbi Zalman Sorotskin, or the Lutzker Rebbe, is a 20th century Orthodox rabbi from Lutsk, Ukraine. And that's the answer he taught about why the wicked son and the son who doesn't know how to ask, She'eno Yodea Lishol, get the same exact answer. Because we're actually talking both times not to the wicked son, but to the one who doesn't know how to ask. There are many people who think that it's not worth speaking up each and every time someone distorts something about Israel, someone makes a statement condemning it, a biased fact or opinion. And it's true. We can't convince them. The Rasha cannot be convinced. We keep a seat open at the table, and we hope one day they will repent and do tshuva, but we don't speak to them to convince them. We have to speak up each and every time, because every time a lie goes unchecked, someone else starts to believe it. And so as we approach the holiday of Passover, the holiday when we fled persecution and slavery to go to the promised land, the land of Israel, a story that's been repeated time and time again throughout our history in the thousands of years since that moment of Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's more important than ever that each of us do our part to ensure that not just us today, but Jews throughout the generations to come will have a homeland to seek refuge to in a time of need. Shabbat Shalom.